Hi, Doug Whyte from Model Car Muse. In our first video introducing Model Car Muse, there was a shot of me at the spray booth spraying Tamiya yellow on a Bugatti body. A friend of mine asked me, what paint stands do I use? And I've got these squiggly things. He was like, what are those? These are stands that I made about 35 years ago, before you could really go out and buy like a third-hand kind of paint stand. I started out with wanting a real heavy base. So I went to one of the junk shops down on Canal Street in New York City, and they had bins of pulleys. They had these odd pulleys. They weren't quite like V-belt pulleys, but they were just a good heavy base. They had a small hole in the center, so I started with that. Then I got some of this armature wire, the stuff that clay sculptors use when they're making a figure. They need a frame to put the clay around to hold it in place. This is really good because it's flexible. It's an alloy, easy to bend. You can roll this out and you can make whatever you need to make a paint stand. It holds itself in place. This stuff is about 3/16 of an inch. I find it to be just right for flexibility, sturdy enough to hold up small parts, even brass or something that might be a little heavier. You can get it thinner, probably not as stable. This stuff, not even sure why I had this, but it's just way too thick. I haven't used it, and I've had this probably for 30 years. Pick up some of this at an art supply store. So, took a section of this into the small hole. I used JB Weld to hold in not only the armature wire into the base, but also the alligator clips. Works really well. JB Weld doesn't last forever. I mean, it's good for probably 5 or 6 years. It's still a great way to go. In 35 years, the one thing I always put up with was the fact that to pick this up, I always ended up picking it up here because I couldn't get my fingers under this really well. So the other day I was thinking about how could I improve that? I really would like to have more of these on hand. Comparison to what you can buy today, you can get your regular paint stands from your hobby supplier, or you can get these guys. These are pretty good. I like to use these especially for really small parts because you can get like a nice little forest of them going. These have steel rods. They don't bend well. And at the same time, when you're picking them up, this base is really lightweight, and that's a problem for stability. I mean, how many times have you lost a part because something fell over? So if you get one of these, add some weight to it. It's my suggestion. I went out and I looked through some of my V-belt pulleys that I've got. Most of them have a pretty big hole in the center. So what I like about them is, unlike these, when I go to grip it and I got to get down here and I end up gripping it here, this, I can get this upper ring and pick it up. I can feel pretty confident I'm not going to lose the stand or my part or something's going to go. And these are still heavy enough. These are actually die-cast metal. And if you can find steel, that would be even better. So for this guy, they all have a set screw, but it's just not going to be long enough in the end. So I'm going to replace it with a bigger kind of cap screw. That gives me lots to work with when it's in there. I've had these now with single posts coming up. I'm going to make one that's double, and that way I can fill the hole. Get this out. Strip. If I wanted a single, it'd be half the length. Put that down in there. I could crank this tight, but I'd still have a gap. I would just put a little tape on the bottom so it forms a little well. Fill it with some JB Weld. Let it dry overnight. What I'm going to do, about right. Put that down in there. Don't even need JB Weld, really. That's pretty tight. Get it right. Let's just make those the same length. So, I got these two. I got one. I got another. All those mentors we've had over the years, the one thing I always think of when I'm filing is, you always draw it down that way. You never drag it back because it would dull the blade. So you can just flare these out just a little bit. Get those on. And I'm going to suggest you put a little 24-hour epoxy or some JB Weld on these guys. So, there you go. got a pretty good stand. You have two of them on there. You can get them going in the same direction or different in there. And you can work things around and be confident that you're not going to lose your part or anything. And this stand always lands really well, and it's easy to pick up. That Bugatti that I mentioned. One of my favorite things on this is top of the radiator. There's a little gauge, a little thermometer. You know, it's a gauge. It's got a metal surround. It's got glass in the center. To make that, I used replicas and miniatures of Maryland cells, Wizard's O's. There are a lot of other companies that make similar things. I like this because these have a little tab that comes out of the circle. So I took two of those circles to make the surround of the gauge, put them together, the tab sticking down so I could drill a hole in the top of the radiator, place that in. In that gauge, I took a little bit of epoxy and I put it right in the center of that opening. And in there, I took two paintbrush hairs, put them in there vertically to show the vertical part of the thermometer. It's super tiny. You really can't see it, but I appreciate the fun I had making it. I made that part off the car, and then it was time to put it on. With that little tab that comes down, I drilled a hole, and I wanted to epoxy it in place. And lately, I've been using less and less 5-minute epoxy. For small things, I'm using 24-hour epoxy, just because it's a much better grip. I knew I wanted it to sit completely vertical and not wobble to the side. I took one of my stands, I brought it down. I put a piece of blue stick tack right on the tip. I put my gauge on the tip, drop it into the hole. It would stay vertical. Put a little glue in, left it overnight. You come in the next day and the stick tack is still stuck to your part. The way to get that off really easily is the one thing stick tack does not like is water. So on a brush, just a little bit of liquid, lay that on there. Stick tack releases. My gauge was ready to go. You can also be really creative with your stuff as you go. The classic engine block, the first thing I did, of course, was glue the two engine halves together. And then to paint it, just put a toothpick right through, pop that in, and it's ready for paint. It's also ready to be just a classic engine stand. You could build your entire engine around this just while it's on the stand. Nice thing about that is if you're painting, or gluing things in place, sometimes you want to rest your hand and work on something just to be steady. Sometimes you want to have your hand up. You can raise it up for whatever reason to get it close to your magnifier or just get it off the surface of the spray booth. Even though they're flexible, they stay where you put them. This armature wire is just perfect for this. And these pieces, I've been using these for 30 years. It's not like, they metal fatigue and break and crack or anything. They're just occasionally replace the JB weld and they're good to go. Oh, look, a magnet. Those things show up everywhere. Long, long ago, I found this steel pulley. I put some felt on the bottom so it sits well. It's super heavy in comparison to the others. I took aluminum rod that happened to fit in there perfectly. I drilled a hole. I ran a piece of steel rod through it to make a simple engine stand. What I like about this is I can pop it out, pop it back in easily. It's at a good height. It's not as adjustable as some of these others, but it also makes it good so I can work on the engine and do the detailing. I like this stand. It's worked out really well. Especially for, just trying to fill a great big hole. Even without the JB weld, the force of this holding that in doesn't fatigue the metal enough that it gets to the point where it breaks. It just holds it in. It's super secure. Maybe a little Loctite on the threads and you're, good for another 35 years. Follow your muse wherever you may find it, and may there always be a project on your bench. Thanks for watching.